What is your imagination if the etheric body was not there, between the physical and the astral?
Okay. To answer that, what I'll need to do is to go back to an earlier point I made, and that is I think the etheric body, there are different aspects to the etheric body. I've just talked about one, which is these bioelectric fields. I suspect there may well be other physical things that are even more subtle, which act on the bioelectric fields and act on synaptic, sort of cell structures which influence these bioelectric fields as well. So my argument would be if those other more subtle transducers are not there, then the person would be as if they had no consciousness, which is not to say they would just be unconscious, but what you would see, there's a phenomenon in epilepsy known as petit mal automatism. This is a condition where an epileptic seizure in just one part of the brain disrupts that part of the brain. But yet other parts of the brain can still function. And the person seems to act more like a robot. So for example, a concert pianist who suffered from this petit mal automatism, it was described, when he was practicing, his mother could hear him practicing, but there would be a pause, which is generally the start of the automaton, and then the practice would continue. But she knows the practice was much more mechanical when he was in this state. So I would argue that, in a sense, that the person would become appear more robotic-like. That's my speculation.
Not intelligent.
Pardon?
You will lose intelligence.
It could be low, but relatively simple. I don't think there would be capacity for abstract thought by any means, but there would be capacity to answer simple questions. What's 1 and 1? I could say 2,
Question?
Oh, right.
Professor, you were mentioning that this bioelectric field
Structure.
seems like it is like a bridge towards the organism and informing intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the mechanism that regulates it, especially for the regeneration of new cells within the bodies, especially for certain brain functions, is located in the hippocampus.
Well, the hippocampus is one region where there are more new cells being created all the time in the brain. There's probably small numbers in other parts of the brain, but the olfactory bulb and the hippocampus are the two regions which show the greatest turnover.
Now the problem is it is a very in the deep brain structure. So you were saying that the walking exercise seems somewhat stimulates it in a certain way.
Yep.
Is there any like medical procedure, for example, that we could like experiment, like regrowing limbs, for example, or?
Okay, regrowing limbs is a hard ask. There is certainly no doubt that children younger than the age of 5, sometimes they play with a guillotine, in the cutting paper, and they cut off the end of their finger. If you don't go to a plastic surgeon to put a skin flap over it, what can happen quite often is the whole phalange will regrow, complete with fingerprint and nail. So the capacity for regeneration certainly seems to be there. It seems to be switched off, and what Mike Levin's laboratory is looking at is how can you switch these on in a controlled way that doesn't suddenly cause cancer. So for regeneration, that's one of their big things. Can we regenerate? As far as the hippocampus is concerned, sure, that's a deep region. Originally it's thought to just play a part in memory, and the idea is that memories are initially stored there and then they're redistributed elsewhere. But we now realize that it plays a much bigger role than just memory. There is a suggestion that, for example, in depression, the rate of new nerve cells in the hippocampus goes down. And many of the treatments which treat depression all seem to have the same effect. They increase the number of new nerve cells. Now, one of the factors which causes the loss in the new nerve cells in the hippocampus is inflammatory processes within the brain. and such things as omega-3 fatty acids, fish oil, is an anti-inflammatory and has an effect, beneficial effect in many places, but on the brain as well. Their exercise increases the number of new nerve cells. Exercise also benefits depression. There are a number of, the meditation does as well, but we don't have time to talk about that. Well, at least I don't now. Right. I hope I've answered in part your question.
Thank you, Richard, for that breaking through presentation. You explained how the biological current are created from the cell, okay, with the movement of the ion and then everything else. We would probably like to know what caused the ion to move out of the cells, because it cannot be random. We think there is some intelligence there. And at the end of the chain, my question is, do you have any idea of the invert transfer function which make the current to act on the cells?
Okay, the first one, what I've presented is a very elementary account of, bioelectric fields, how cells create. And what I have left out, mainly because I'm not up to the details of this, but the detailed quantum mechanical processes which govern whether ions move, how they move, etc. And we're now recognizing that quantum mechanical processes are actually crucially important in biology. It was thought for quite a while that essentially, in fact, a lot of biologists were just classical, almost Newtonian physicists in the way they saw atoms. But we now understand that, in fact, quantum processes are very important, and it is revolutionizing. There's a whole field called quantum biology, which I know relatively little about. So what I've presented here, with apologies, is a simplistic, classical model, which at least goes some way towards giving an understanding of what these fields are. Now, the second part of your question is, how do the fields in turn influence the actual biological systems? It seems that there are a number of ways. It seems that there are specific protein systems, once again quantum processes may play a part, which appear to respond to these fields and in turn change their channel behavior, allowing certain ions, certain chemicals to flow or not flow. One of them in the case of preventing the cell becoming cancerous, even though the gene said make cancer, was because what was happening was that the change in the bioelectric field of the cell caused more sodium and a chemical called butyrate to come in, and that in turn blocked this, which blocked that, and so it goes on. I'm not a developmental biologist, but it seems that what the point I'm making is these bioelectric field structures have a crucial role, not just in developmental biology and health, because I think they have a huge impact on health, but also I think are part of this etheric nexus, this link. I don't think the bioelectric fields are the whole story by any means, but they're a part of the story, and I think an interesting part of the story.
Richard, would I be right in going away from this interesting talk that we are going to get some help with preventing cancer and dementia in the future? Would you say you're on a springboard? Because
look, I don't know about whether Mike Levin's lab is going to be the ones who come. Certainly they're working hard. This one is a long-term trend. One of the things that whenever there's a, quote, breakthrough announced in medicine, it's almost always the same basic pattern. One is, this is an amazing breakthrough. How long will it take? Oh, about 5 years. Next question, we need more funding for research in this. This is invariably the pattern. And 90% of the discoveries come to nothing. They just, so many cures have worked on mice that don't work on humans. So having said that, which might sound a little bit depressing, there is nevertheless a lot of very exciting development. In terms of cancer, probably one of the most exciting areas, which is related to this but not the same, is the role of the immune system, our own immune system, and in cancer, and the whole field of immunotherapy is growing rapidly. What we're also recognising is the link between the mind and the emotional processes and the immune system, and I think the importance of mind-body medicine is being increasingly appreciated now that we understand a mechanism of how they might work. So I think we are at a very exciting stage. Are we there yet where we've cured it? No, some of my very good friends have recently passed away with cancer. Nevertheless, there are very, very exciting developments which give me hope. I would say not 5 years, maybe 10 to 15, but I might be wrong because a lot of science is now literally growing exponentially. You probably won't get the discoveries. That's a separate issue about the role of the drug companies, which are another one of my bête noirs, but that's something else.
Have there been any tests done with swimming versus? Have there been any tests done with swimming versus walking?
There may have been. I don't know. The thing about walking is it's not just the amount of walking you do. You see, the hippocampus, among other things, has a map of your space, literally location. And in fact, walking and moving through that space stimulates the hippocampus in a rather special way that simply walking on a treadmill doesn't. The hippocampus, if you will, can act as an amazing whiteboard in your head. And some of these people who have this amazing memory have managed to use the hippocampus as a whiteboard. There was a very old method of training of memory, which was known as the method of loci. Famous, one of the very early classical Greek poets claimed this method was named after him. And in it, you first of all need to get to know a location very well, generally a temple. So you walk around and get to know it very, very well. And then when you need to remember something, you create a visual symbol of one or parts of it, and you place the visual symbol at various locations in the temple. So generally, if you were an orator or if you were a lawyer, an advocate, and you were defending, my client fought in the Trojan War. You'd have an image of maybe a Trojan horse, and you'd locate it on the thing, and was poisoned by his wife. Poison, maybe a bottle, skull, crossbones, you'd locate that. Then when the time came to present that argument, Simonius, I think it is, that's the name anyway, you would look down and you'd see the Trojan horse and you say, my client fought in the Trojan War. This method of locating things in an imaginary space worked amazingly. It was taught in the ancient world. It then died out. It was rediscovered in the Renaissance. And some of the people who had trained themselves with this were then put to the stake and burnt alive on the grounds that if they had memories so good, they must be in league with the devil. So there is something special about moving in space. Now, maybe moving in water is the same thing, I don't know, but I'm not aware of it.
Richard, what a wonderful thing you've just described. The Australian Aborigine does that exactly.
Oh, okay.
In the memory. And can I say that the Australian Aborigines right around Australia remembered 10,000 years back as sea levels rose and their areas were inundated around the coastal zone. More than that, their memories actually go back 30,000 years to the passing of the megafauna.
Oh.
So what I'm saying here, and I know this a little bit because Olga would have been a better exponent of this. They tie the memory, just as you've said, to location. And Mona, her sister, Aboriginal sister, would say, they would travel into Anunga lands in northern South Australia, and she would start singing as soon as they entered her territory. And the songs were prompted by the actual location. So what I'm saying here, just very briefly, is that in Aboriginal society, their memory is tied to location. That's why they're very preciously believing in location. They don't like to be moved away and be stolen children, etc., which removes their culture and spirituality. So by associating with location, bringing back the memory, which is there, inherited from thousands of years and thousands of generations. We have here a living culture. The Australian Aboriginal is a living culture which has practiced this very fact that you've described now. Thank you.
Oh, look, thank you so much. That's a fascinating thought. That is a fascinating thought. Yeah. Because it actually generalised the notion to, it's almost related to the collective unconscious, but on that broad scale. Thank you so much. That was fascinating.
Another one on the remembering of the past life. In the Buddhist tradition, specifically in the Abhidharma Kosha Bhashyam from Vasubandhu, it's very clearly written down that the reincarnating person starts remembering all its life at the 7th month inside the womb, and that it loses completely that at birth due to the trauma. Are you aware of any study on fetus in regard with that?
That would fit in perfectly with, first of all, the notion that these memories, from the 7th month, because that's actually from the time when the brain has developed to the point where these connections have enough richness to be able to support these memories. Whether the loss of memories is due to the trauma of birth or other things, I don't know. My suspicion is that it may be more than the trauma may contribute, but I suspect there are other processes at work as well. For example, the development of this neonatal amnesia, which, as I said, is seen in animals as well, appears to be something that's not necessarily due to trauma, but literally due to additional nerve cells being created at a very high rate in the hippocampus, and it's as if they're dislodging the lookup table of where the memories are in the rest. So the memories are still there in the rest of the brain, but they're there as unconscious memories. Now, under certain circumstances, they can be recalled.
Actually, my question has to do with that. In esoteric psychology, there's this idea that past lives come back to us as sort of like sub-personalities within our current life. So you were talking about those unconscious things, that those past lives perhaps are some of the projections that we project our past life feelings on other people. Could that be a mechanism that you've just explained on how that actually happens?
I think it's certainly part of it. And look, I personally agree with that, what you're suggesting. What's the evidence for it? I'm not aware of evidence, but nevertheless, it makes sense to me. Yeah. Go for it.
Yes, I was slightly wanting to say something about what you said, and Jacques got me going with what he said. I used to say to people, if there's reincarnation, if I can't remember about it, in what sense is it me? And it wasn't until I did the Vipassana meditation course that I learned in what sense it's me, because the things the Buddha said, it's not your memories and stuff that you get in the next life, it's your reactions to things. They call it sankhara. And the little diagram that you put at the end that showed which parts, it wasn't the storytelling ones.
Yeah,
it was those
right.
exactly accords with my experience from Vipassana meditation. So I reckon you ought to do a Vipassana meditation course.
10 days is a long time.
Yes, I have recalled quite a few of my important Earth lifetimes. Yes, when you are a child, you actually, through birthing, I can remember the first time being smacked on the bottom when I was born, actually experiencing pain for the first time. And it wasn't, I knew at 20 I was here for a reason, and I wasn't I didn't come from planet Earth, but it wasn't until I started travelling with my spiritual groups to the places to do with my past lifetimes, which had actually been painted, where those lifetimes and memories were actually confirmed for me that they were real. So that started to open up more about 42. When you go to these places, it's like there's a point that you really know. So I think it's those memories becoming conscious memories. And it's partly tied up with your journey this lifetime, your spiritual lifetime quite often. Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, I wonder whether your work is also correlated to permanent atoms.
To
Permanent atoms.
not directly. I'm loosely familiar with the concept, but at this stage, let me explain how I organise things in my head. There are basically three piles. So there are things that I say, yep, this makes enough sense. Whether the evidence is strong enough as far as scientists are concerned, for me, I've seen enough to say, yeah, this really does make sense. Then there's the other one, which is, nope, this really doesn't make sense, you know. The middle one is, I don't know yet. The middle one is the biggest one. and that's where the permanent atoms are. At this stage, I don't know.
That's an amazing journey you've taken. I'm looking forward to being able to regrow my teeth sometime. So,
I'd be happy with hair.
well, yeah, so I'll have to learn how to stimulate my etheric field or the chemicals in that part of my body, I guess, in some ways. I'd be interested to see if there's any research or evidence eventually for seeing the etheric field, as Theosophy puts it, formulating before the body starts forming. So, there's all sorts of theosophical theories around that, and Buddhist theories and stuff that is amazing to study, but looking at it from a scientific perspective.
But if the bioelectric field determines the development of the organism, in a sense it predates it, doesn't it? In other words, there's something there controlling the development before that development takes place. So there's an element of it occurring beforehand, but at the same time, it's in part created by physical processes within the body as well. So it's a mixture, but it does play a role, in a sense, a causative role as well. So sorry, I didn't mean it.
No, it's a part. It could also be a part of the memory you're talking about.
Exactly.
But what does the memory of the mother and the father play into that? That's another question. But anyway, Richard, I could go on forever, I guess. But thank you very much for sharing with us this morning. I think it's been a very rich and beautiful sharing, and I think for me, it's given me a total different perspective and understanding of this whole etheric concept, which I think science eventually brings to these things. And I'd love to see much more theosophical research done in this area, so at least we are able to collect all the scientific theory as it comes up and publish it and build on it from to start proving some of our theosophical theory, which after all is only theory, which we also are building on as part of our theosophical journey. So amazing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.